Hello nerds, and welcome back to Lore of the Worlds. Here we find ourselves once again, sitting on the cusp of a major Sanderson release. And this isn't any old release. No. This one is big, both in significance as well as physical size. Word on the street pegs it at about 1,300 pages long, and I'm honestly not 100% certain at this point that it won't be accompanied by like a secret novel or two, because this man is... he's a maniac. So with all of these scrumptious, delicious pages ahead of us, any number of insane twists can and probably will happen. So, to cognitively anchor ourselves, I want to talk about the 10 biggest questions surrounding Stormlight as a series. We're going to talk about how likely they are to be answered in the upcoming release, and whether or not the answers will have, greater implications for the rest of the Cosmere. Unfortunately, I recently suffered a freak tinfoil-related brain injury, and I am now completely unable to count the number 10. But, lucky for us, Bookborn was willing to help out with the final few questions on my list. Thank you for your help, Bookborn.
No problem. I think I actually owe it to you after my A Song of Ice and Fire Theory videos sent you to the hospital. I mean, that's why you haven't released anything in a while, right? Yes. Okay. Top 10 unanswered Stormlight questions before Wind and Truth. And obviously full Stormlight spoilers here with, a few light Cosmere lore spoilers sprinkled in to keep it a little bit spicy. Would you do the honors for me, Bookborn? Absolutely. I'll see you after the jump.
Right at the end of Rhythm of War, we witness Dalinar and Odium lock themselves into a contest of champions. It's going to take place at the top of Urithiru 10 days from when it was agreed upon, and it's going to determine the fate of Roshar as each side gets to, well, you guessed it, pick a champion. But basically right after this was agreed upon, like literally within minutes, a major wrench was thrown into everything about this plan: Taravangian's ascension to Odium. So basically everything's in chaos and nobody really knows what's going on anymore. But for a moment, let's assume that the contest happens in some form, right? As I believe that it's going to. Who's going to be the champions for each side? Honor's side is a little bit easier to guess at, so let's go ahead and start there. The obvious choice here would be Kaladin. He's a fantastic fighter, he's led Bridge 4, and he's bonded to a literal Spren of Honor. But I would wager that he won't be the champion for a few reasons. He's probably going to be off in Shinovar with Szeth for starters. He has like a whole quest to do there, and the contest is only in like 10 days. Beyond that, Dalinar has explicitly told him that he's going to be the champion. So let's go ahead and take a look at Dalinar. Beyond outright telling people that he's going to be the champion, Dalinar just makes a lot of sense for this role. He's no slouch in a fight. I mean, we've watched him kill a man with his bare hands before. He's also demonstrated many times his proficiency with weapons of all kinds. And keep in mind that he's a bondsmith in addition to his fighting powers. He could very well find a way to use these abilities to his advantage, possibly even to find a relatively peaceful resolution to this conflict. We really have no idea what bondsmiths are capable of, especially now that Honor is dead. And beyond all that, it's possible he will have or already has access to a Dawnshard, which is something I've speculated on before in a theory video and something we're going to touch on a little bit later in this one. So on to the slightly more interesting question. Who's going to be Odium's champion? Now that Odium has a new vessel, which we will of course be talking about in detail later on, I could see any number of things happening. Let's go over a few of the more likely candidates for Odium's champion. One of the most obvious selections is our friend Moash, an all-around dastardly dude that was once a founding member of Bridge 4. Recently, he's cemented his status as the worst character ever by killing Teft, which we hate. But he's been working closely with Odium for a while now, and he seems to be in a unique position within his ranks, running errands for Odium, fighting his battles, and wielding Jezrien's old honor blade. But something interesting happened at the end of Rhythm of War. During the climax when Urithiru came alive, Moash was blinded in a way that appears to be irreversible. I mean, it's possible that he finds a way to reverse this, but I think that it makes sense from a story perspective that this sticks around, at least for a little while. Now, many people believe that Sanderson is setting Moash up for a redemption arc, and if so, I would guess that the first step Moash could take to redemption would be denying Odium, both as a deity as well as a possible offer of champion from him. So who else looks like a candidate? Another person I've seen thrown around quite a lot is El. Now, this is a character introduced at the very end of Rhythm of War. He's quite mysterious, being described as a Parshendi with their carapace removed and metal armor somehow grafted onto their skin. Awesome. They appear to hold some sort of odd position in the Odium's ranks, though, and at some point the old Odium stripped them of their title as well as their rhythms, but the new manager appears to have chosen him to accomplish something special. Could El be Odium's champion? Well, I would wager that that's a pretty likely possibility. And I'd also wager that we'll be seeing a lot of El going forward if he isn't someone that we already know in some capacity. But there are a few alternate options that I've seen thrown around as potential champions for Odium. I've seen Adolin offered as a possible champion, but like, what? Are we reading the same books here? Like, under what circumstances would Adolin agree to be Odium's champion? I really don't see that happening. One more that I've seen brought up quite a bit is the idea that Dalinar will be made to fight a child, possibly Gavinor. I don't know how to properly express how much I hate this theory, but there is some evidence there that's worth looking into. So let's do that, I guess. This theory mostly springs from a death rattle that is phrased in the following way.
I hold the suckling child in my hands, a knife at his throat, and know that all who live wish me to let the blade slip, spill its blood upon the ground over my hands, and with it, gain us further breath to draw.
Okay, yeah, I'll admit that that sounds passingly like what we're probably going to be witnessing with the contest, but what other evidence is there? The only other thing of substance I've seen mentioned is that Gavinor was tortured by Voidspren while the siege of Kholinar was going down, but remember, this has to be a willing champion, and how is a 3-year-old going to consent to, like, any part of this? Also, wouldn't being tortured by Voidspren make Gavinor, like, fear them more? How would that connect to him agreeing to fight his grand uncle to death, a man who loves and hangs out with him all the time? This theory it's just weird to me. I don't like it. Feel free to make fun of me if it ends up happening, as I definitely will be making fun of the proponents of it when it doesn't end up happening.
But there is one more question about the contest that we are going to need to talk about. Will there be a contest at all?
During the final chapters of Rhythm of War, we get the impression that Taravangian, the new vessel of Odium, really wants to get out of this contest. He's seen just how bad of an idea it was to agree to in the first place and is looking for a way to dip out. He seems to see one clear path to getting out of it and seemingly wants to pursue this path to its conclusion. Did his meeting and trickery of Hoid have something to do with this? Well, it's definitely possible, but we can't take that as anywhere near confirmed. I mean, we don't really even know if he did trick Hoid in any sort of particularly large way. It's also possible that this has something to do with Moash or El. I mean, I'd maybe even begrudgingly accept that maybe Odium tricks Gavinor into, like, somehow nullifying the contest.
But I still wouldn't like it.
There are a metric cremload of question marks here, so hopefully we start getting answers soon, and most likely the contest will be over or left behind in the dust by the end of Wind and Truth.
So, Szeth, bit of an odd cookie. He went ahead and followed orders from whoever held a rock for several years. You gotta be pretty devoted to your religion to do that for any time at all, much less several years. But he was deemed truthless, and he obeyed what his religious and societal leaders asked of him, however stupid that may look from an outside perspective. So, respect, I guess.
But this brings up a few important questions that we'll probably be getting answers to soon. First of all, what exactly did he say to be deemed truthless? And second, what will his cleanse of Shinovar entail now that he's determined with utmost certainty that he was actually right the whole time? Let's tackle these questions by first looking at everything that we know about Szeth before he became truthless. We know that he trained with the Honor Blades, possibly all 9 that were available to the Shin at the time. We see Nail with his Honor Blade again when we first see him, so it's possible he already recovered it by the time Szeth was training with him. But we don't really know for certain. At some point, Szeth also declared that the Voidbringers had returned, and that's about all we know. Beyond that, Szeth's entire backstory is completely shrouded in mystery. The timeline of events, reasonings behind anything, and his entire childhood is just one gaping chasm filled to the brim with question marks. Which makes it a bit hard to guess at the second question. Shin society in general is quite secretive to outsiders as well as to us, the reader. So we can only really guess at where Szeth stood in any political structures, religious institutions, anything like that. And I think that his standing in all of this is going to play a huge role in why he was deemed truthless. I think that we can assume that being able to train with the Honor Blades put Szeth in some sort of position of power, but not enough power that he was calling the actual shots. And I would wager that he saw something that those calling the shots either didn't believe, didn't want to believe, or most likely, in my opinion, he wasn't supposed to see in the first place. Any of these would give Szeth a pretty justifiable reason to want to come back and purge the hell out of the institutions that outcast him for speaking, the truth. So what will this purge actually look like? Well, it's hard to say without knowing more about the institutions of the Shin, as well as the reasons why Szeth was deemed truthless in the first place. It could be anything from a coup of the institutions to a general purging of the populations to full-blown genocide, but I would guess it's probably not going to be that last one. He's going to have to justify any of the choices he makes to his spren and to himself. And going into this, do keep in mind a few things about Szeth that haven't been mentioned so far. He was resurrected by Nail himself, seemingly for a good reason we're still unaware of. But this is Nail, so honestly, who in damnation knows if the reason goes beyond thinking Szeth would be a decent Skybreaker. It should also be noted that when he was resurrected, his soul was kind of badly stapled back onto his still barely living body, which has the side effect of Szeth, leaving an after image of himself for those who can see into the spiritual realm. Also, quite importantly, he was given possession of Nightblood by Nail. None of these threads have really been fully explored yet, but we will almost certainly see all of them make an appearance in some way in this last book. Whether any of them have anything to do with the purging of Shinovar is yet to be seen, but I would guess that anyone trying to stand in the way of a very pissed off Szeth wielding a very bloodthirsty Nightblood is gonna have a bad time. There's a lot that's been made about the unmade known as Ba-Ado-Mishram, but for every bit of information we have on her, far more questions seem to pop up right in their place. It's clear that Ba-Ado-Mishram was amongst the most intelligent of the unmade, and may have been a general in Desolation's past. She's responsible for the False Desolation, in which forms of power were handed out to normal Parshendi as opposed to being granted by Odium. We don't know if Odium had anything to do with this false desolation. In fact, it seems likely that he had little to no control over it. What's important to us is how it ended. Throughout the false desolation, Mishram connected to the entire Singer race, granting them forms of power as well as void light. This seems to have crossed some sort of line with the Knights Radiant, who resolved to put an end to it by enacting a plan never before conceived. A team of knights, including a bondsmith as well as a herald, managed to capture Ba-Ado-Mishram inside of a perfect gemstone, locking her away from the Singers as well as Roshar itself. And this succeeded, but at an unforeseen price. Something about the trapping of Mishram completely broke the way things work on Roshar. The biggest effect it had was on the Parshendi.
Every Parshendi, save for a small group known as the Listeners, who rejected her forms, was connected to Mishram, and upon her capture, had both their connection as well as identity ripped away from them. This left them in the state we see them in at the beginning of Stormlight Archive, or slave form as the Listeners refer to it. But beyond that, there were several profoundly odd effects that her capture had on all of Roshar. Capturing Mishram seems to have damaged the souls of every living being on Roshar in some sort of way.
As one who has suffered for so many centuries, as one whom it broke, please find Mishram and release her, not just for her own good, for the good of all Spren. For I believe that in confining her, we have caused a greater wound to Roshar than anyone ever realized.
The greatest example of this is in the Deadeyes. Those are Spren whose knights broke their oaths. Now, normally Spren would return to the cognitive realm to find another bond or live their lives, but the trapping of Mishram seems to have made them completely unable to do that. Instead, they ended up stuck in the form of swords, the shard blades that we are familiar with and are used to this day. All of this leaves us with a few questions to keep in mind going into Wind and Truth. What is the nature of the connection that Ba-Ado-Mishram shares with the Singers? What is the nature of the connection that Ba-Ado-Mishram shares with the Spren? And most importantly, what is Ba-Ado-Mishram's relationship with Roshar as a whole? I mean, it's clear to me that there is some sort of deeper connection here that needs to be repaired. Kalak himself would agree to this. But where is her gemstone hidden? Is it possible to release her from her prison? What would the consequences be for releasing her? Like I said earlier, there are two questions for basically every answer that we have about Ba-Ado-Mishram. And I'm currently working on a long theory video about her and the other unmade that should come out relatively soon. But for now, I'll leave this section with one last question for you to mull over in the meantime. It's clear that Mishram has a deep connection to the functioning of Roshar, and it's also clear that Odium did not until very recently. So, what was Ba-Ado-Mishram before she was unmade? Food for thought. We have to talk about Ishar, because that guy's up to some weird stuff. He's recovered his honor blade and appears completely unchained from the limits that honor once placed upon its use. We've seen him drain stormlight from individuals by bonding them with the ground. We've seen him form his own perpendicularity. We've seen him get damn close to stealing Dalinar's bond with the Stormfather. And perhaps most terrifyingly, we've seen his experiments on Spren. Toward the end of Rhythm of War, when Dalinar and company cleared Ishar's camp, he found the decaying remains of Spren. Spren in the physical realm, forced into semblances of bodies through unknown processes. We see Honor Spren, Cultivation Spren, and Cryptics, all in a process of aborted transformation. We also read in Ishar's notebooks that these experiments were additionally attempted on Ash Spren, though there was no evidence of this that we witnessed. To be clear, this should not be possible. Spren can be pulled into the physical realm, but they have no bodies to physically exist there. No, what's happening here is far crueler. Spren are being captured by Ishar's men in the cognitive realm and are somehow being forced to exist in the physical realm. But since they have no bodies, these approximations that are left behind are grotesque, twisted distortions of the human anatomy. So, the ultimate questions here. How and why is Ishar doing this? It would make sense that Ishar is somehow leveraging his powers unchained from honor to accomplish this, but using what mechanics? I've seen some speculate that he's forcing Spren into human bodies, and that seems like it could be possible. But the wording in the chapter is very specific. Let's take a look at that real quick.
Our first honor Spren lived nearly 15 minutes, a new record, and orders of magnitude longer than all previous attempts. Honor Spren seem to have the most human-like essences. When transferred, the organs and muscles form most naturally. We must capture more of them.
So yeah, the exact verbiage here is transferred, implying that these Spren are somehow getting picked out of the cognitive realm and shoved into the physical, not bonded onto the body of an existing human. Both the mechanics and implications of this are yet to be fully realized, but it doesn't look like Spren are going to be walking freely in the physical realm anytime soon. And all of this begs the question, why? Why go through all this trouble? I mean, I don't think that Ishar would be doing this just to experiment for the fun of it, but I could be wrong, of course. There has to be some greater purpose that he's trying to accomplish, right? Something he's trying to pull off. And honestly, I'm at a loss. I don't know what he's trying to do here. Like build an army of surge binders, perhaps? But if so, it would presumably be pretty hard to get them to fight on his side, right? What is clear is that our protagonist should be incredibly wary of Ishar going forward. We have no clue what he's truly capable of now, and he's definitely thrown morality and good faith away completely. But Kaladin and Szeth are on their way to find him and purge Shinovar as a side quest, so I would wager that we won't have to wait all that long for a resolution to a lot of these questions. Okay, so Taln. He's one of the 10 heralds, he's patron of the Stone Wards, only herald to never break, and really just overall alpha male beast. During the epilogue of Way of Kings, we experience a chapter from Hoid's perspective where Taln returns, bursting through the gates of Alethkar, honor blade in hand, upon which he announces the return of Desolations. At some point, he was whisked away from Alethkar proper, and during Words of Radiance, we see him being visited by Amaram in a Shattered Plains mental asylum. But curiously, it's mentioned that he came to the camps alongside a normal shard blade, not his own honor blade. And this isn't an in-universe misunderstanding or a mistake made by Sanderson while writing. In Words of Brandon, we've seen him confirm that Taln's honor blade was swapped at some point.
How was Dawnshards able to bond Taln's shard blade, honor blade?
It's not Taln's honor blade.
Which raises a few related questions. First off, who stole it and why? There's only a few groups that I can see having anything to do with it. We see the reappearance of Taln through the eyes of Hoid, so maybe he had something to do with it? He is collecting magic systems from around the Cosmere after all, so this would sort of fit with his MO. He also apparently ran off into the hills in an incredibly suspicious manner while accompanying Taln to the Shattered Plains. If you ask me, Hoid is the #1 suspect here. But Words of Brandon around Hoid having the honor blade are honestly a little confusing. I'm not sure what to make of these. There's also Amaram, who may have stolen it for the express purpose of helping the secret society that he's a part of, the Sons of Honor. But we never hear him mention it or hear any other reference to it by other Sons of Honor members. I could see the late Queen Aesudan having something to do with it. I could see her maybe apprehending the blade in the name of either safekeeping or some sort of scheme, and she definitely would have access to spare shard blades, at least I'd assume. We don't have any real idea if she was in contact with Voidbringers or the unmade Yelignar at this point, but if she was, it's possible that she stole the blade at their behest. Honestly, I would say that there's a high likelihood that Odium or one of his minions is in current possession of the blade, considering both Amaram and Aesudan were corrupted by Odium at some point. And even if the Queen stored the blade somewhere in Kholinar before she was corrupted, it's now completely overrun by Fused, and I would wager it's probably been discovered by them. But there is one more question to bring up here. How was the blade even stolen from Taln? If honor blades behave anything like shard blades, as they appear to in Szeth's chapters where he's in possession of Jezrien's blade, then it seems logical that the blade could be recalled by Taln at any moment, even if it was taken from him. It would then serve to reason that he gave up the honor blade of his own choosing. But why? Did he not feel worthy of it anymore? Was Hoid maybe able to convince him of it in a short span where Taln was more lucid than normal? Did he give it to the Queen that simply asked for it? Or is there something more nefarious going on here that is obscured to us? And just doing some Cosmere theory crafting here, is it possible maybe that someone stole his connection to the blade, their innate bond to each other? I mean, we've seen Ishar nearly succeed at stealing Dalinar's bond to the Stormfather. Did something similar happen here? I mean, I presume Taln has a pretty close bond with this blade. He's been in possession of it for several thousand years and never broke his oaths. So where did it go? Who stole it, and who's this culprit? There is a lot to ruminate on there, and frankly, I don't know how much is gonna be answered in this next book. So stay tuned, we may have to keep looking for evidence for this one for quite some time. Or who knows? Maybe he just forgot it on a rock somewhere and it'll fly out of nowhere and bonk Dalinar on the head during the next high storm. Who's to say? Honor is very dead. That much is very clear to both the reader and our protagonists. Broken by Odium and possibly the actions of the Heralds and Knights Radiant, Honor ultimately succumbed and ceased to exist. And yet, that may not be the whole story. The Honorspren Notum himself declares,
Honor is not dead so long as he lives in the hearts of men.
Taken by itself, this statement is a metaphor. The values of honor are alive and well so long as men hold to them. The concept of honor still lives. But will honor ever return as a deity? Can the broken pieces of a dead god be reassembled, made into something new? Or are they simply gone? Let's first take a look at where honor went. The vessel is dead, but honor's power still remains on Roshar, even if it is splintered beyond recognition. In the physical realm, Honor's investiture primarily resides in two places, the Honor Blades and the Stormlight powering most of Roshar's magic. The Honor Blades are his solid physical body, a god metal akin to Atium or Laracia. The Stormlight is his, well, light, and all the storms blew on Roshar long before Honor ever arrived. They originate from Adnalcium after all. By what we can tell, Honor sort of took the storms as his own. Indeed, the Stormfather is a splinter of Honor and didn't really exist as a Spren until Honor directly intervened to make him one. And it's further said that the Stormfather is where Tanavast's cognitive shadow lies. So apparently at some point before his death, Honor's vessel Tanavast seems to have found a way to imprint some form of cognitive shadow on the Stormfather, or his cognitive shadow was responsible for creating the Stormfather in the first place? The words of Brandon surrounding this whole thing, they're pretty vague, so I would suggest you read them yourself and try to divine your own interpretation. Very little is known about the mechanics of how this all actually works, or if the cognitive shadow can do anything beyond projecting visions on those chosen by the Stormfather, as we see in Dalinar's chapters. Furthermore, Honor was once directly responsible for the creation of Honorspren, but passed that responsibility along to the Stormfather when he realized he was dying. They are direct splinters of Honor, and thus may potentially hold the key to his return, though this is purely theoretical on my part. Unfortunately, we can't really say what may have happened to any pieces of Honor that may have been found in the spiritual realm. We know far too little of the realm in general, and even less about how the shards interact with it. So Honor is still around in a sense, but in my estimation, you'd probably need two specific things to fully bring about his return. You'd need a glue of sorts, something to bind the pieces back together, and a vessel to put them in, a living being to take up the power of the shard and ascend to godhood. Let's take a look at our potential vessels. The two most obvious vessels that jump out to people are Kaladin Stormblessed and Dalinar Kholin. Both have special relationships with Honor and the pieces left behind, and both are suitable candidates in their own right. Kaladin is bonded to an Honor Spren, and Syl is a special Honor Spren at that. And Kaladin's progressing quickly down the path to becoming a 5th ideal Knight Radiant. Most curiously, the Stormfather refers to him as Son of Tanavast as opposed to Son of Honor, and Kaladin holds the unique distinction of being the only character to be referred to this way. And to cap it all off, he is literally referred to as Stormblessed by the characters in story. Dalinar, on the other hand, is bonded to the Stormfather himself. Honor's cognitive shadow has spoken to him in visions, and Dalinar seems to be able to accomplish things that no bondsmith before him has ever come close to, or should even theoretically be capable of achieving. And while both may be fantastic candidates to ascend, we still need to find that glue to pull the broken god back together. In my estimation, there is only one thing capable of accomplishing this: a Dawnshard. I've talked quite a bit about where this Dawnshard might be in a theory video aptly named Dalinar and the Dawnshard. And we'll hear Bookborn talk a little bit about what they may be capable of in a little while. But, and this is only my theory here, that is the one power in the Cosmere that may be capable of resurrecting honor in any meaningful way. So, back to the original question, can honor be reforged, remade? While we will have to wait and see for sure, I am willing to stake a guess. Yes, honor can be reforged. Honor will be reforged. And I can't wait to see how it happens. One of the biggest questions on everyone's mind at the end of Rhythm of War was... I'm sorry, what? Wait, okay, Taravangian is Odium now? What? And yes, that does appear to be the case, and most likely will continue to be the case for the foreseeable future. However, Taravangian's ascension leaves some big questions on the table. How have the plans of Odium changed now that the deity has a new vessel? This is going to be quite hard to answer without a little more information, but we can assume a few things. We can start by safely assuming that Taravangian's plans for the deity will absolutely be changing, and will likely be quite different from the plans of his predecessor. Race was almost completely broken by the end of his tenure as Odium, being bent almost completely by the whims of the Shard itself. But now that there is a fresh vessel, one not yet tainted by long years of holding the Shard, they can clearly see that there is room for significant improvements to the long-term plans Race had laid. In the final 2 Taravangian chapters of Rhythm of War, we can clearly see him realizing how much can and should be changed about the strategy going forward. And while Taravangian finds himself in a unique position to revise the course Odium is steering, he does bring some significant baggage to the role. We still have no idea how much influence Taravangian's boon from Cultivation will hold over him. Before ascending, he swung wildly between what seems to be an extreme intellect and extreme sort of stupidity or passion, I guess, on a day-to-day basis. Now that he's taken the reins of Odium, we have no idea how this is going to affect his intellect and thought processes, if at all. It's also important to bear in mind that Cultivation granted this boon directly, and it's entirely possible that she did so seeing that Taravangian will someday possibly ascend. If she can use this to her advantage at all, you better believe that she will. Any slight advantage this could give her over Odium could be key in keeping him contained away from her carefully laid plans, whatever those may be. We should also keep in mind the previous deal that Taravangian made with Odium at the end of Oathbringer, and let's take a closer look at how it's worded exactly.
Kharbranth, he said, preserve only Kharbranth. You may destroy all other nations. Just leave my city. It is what I beg of you. The world was lost. Humankind doomed. They had planned to protect so much more, but he saw now how little they knew. One city before the storms, one land protected, even if the rest had to be sacrificed. Kharbranth, Odium said, the city itself, and any humans who have been born into it, along with their spouses. This is whom I will spare. Do you agree to this?
So, what would this mean to the current iteration of Odium? It's difficult to parse how this would affect things going forward, and it's very possible that this contract is null and void now that Taravangian controls both sides of the bargain. But oaths made on Roshar are important. They're binding. Regardless of whether or not both sides of this agreement wanted to dismiss it, it's entirely possible that the Shard of Odium could not break this agreement. Which further begs the question, if Taravangian wants to save them all, as he puts it at the end of Rhythm of War, how would this interfere with the oath to preserve only Kharbranth? I don't think that Odium is gonna be forced to destroy everything except for Kharbranth. It's the spirit of the contract that he's bound to. My question is whether or not the new version of Odium would even want to destroy anything at all. Which brings us to the ultimate question about Odium. how has Odium's relationship with Roshar changed? The old vessel simply wanted to get away. He wasted too much time in the Rosharan system and wanted to leave for greener pastures. Taravangian, on the other hand, is a native Rosharan. He grew up there, and presumably wants to protect his home planet. I don't think he wants to leave it behind. In fact, he may very well want to stop the endless cycle of wars in favor of some new order, something far less destructive to his home planet. As opposed to constantly tearing down Roshar, why not build it up into something glorious? I mean, conquest could even be launched directly from Roshar. Oh, hey, what's that thing that just popped up in the right corner of your screen? Maybe it's a sign to go watch the Dalinar and the Dawnshard theory I posted. I mean, who knows what crazy theories you might find on the other side of that link. Cultivation is Enigma. But while we've only actually seen her a little, her actions have had quite the profound effect on both the characters of Stormlight as well as the plot itself. First and foremost, she's been involved with the boons granted to 3 individuals that have gone on to be particularly important to the future of Roshar. Dalinar, now a bondsmith, Lift, whose powers are fueled by food converted into lifelight and can sort of see into the cognitive realm, and Taravangian, who you may remember as the new Odium. If you don't remember that, then what were you even doing during the last question? We've also seen Cultivation involved with one thing mentioned less often, but is also quite important. During the scene where Dalinar asks Cultivation for a boon, she offhandedly implies that she is in possession of Nightblood. So, what are her plans? The theory I've seen thrown around most often is that she's setting up the 3 individuals mentioned earlier to take up the mantle of shards. We've already seen this happen with Taravangian, and wouldn't you know it, Nightblood just so happened to be involved in that ascension directly. I could definitely also see Lift ascending to Cultivation, but I'm not entirely convinced that Dalinar will take up the Mantle of Honor. I think the task Cultivation has cut out for him has more to do with the reforging of honor than the actual ascension bit. But that's just speculation. It could very well come to pass that all 3 do end up ascending. Which would beg the question, why would Cultivation herself theoretically be giving up her power? Again, it's not stated that this will happen, but would, in theory, she have justifiable reason to do so? I would argue yes, absolutely. We saw with Race just how strongly vessels can be warped by the shards they carry. However, this happens over long periods of time, and the newer a vessel is to the shard that they hold, the more control they have over that power. The longer they hold that shard, the more their vessel is aligned to the shard's intent, and the harder they find it to exercise any sort of control outside of those bounds. So, if Cultivation is looking to give up the shard that she holds, I would guess that the reasoning is as follows. She wants to get 3 new vessels, all Roshara natives, that can exercise the full extent of their powers and work together for the good of Roshar. As a reminder, during Cultivation's tenure, she's seen Roshar tear itself apart again and again due to the meddling of an external god. But now that Odium is truly invested in Roshar and the Rosharan system in general, maybe it'll be possible to stop the endless cycle of desolations and killing in pursuit of, well, change. In essence, my guess would be that she's trying to cultivate a better future for Roshar. This leaves us with one more question that we've touched on quite a bit in the last few sections. How much control does Cultivation's vessel currently exercise over her shard? This is another hard one to speculate on without more information, but there are a few things to keep in mind. First off, Cultivation does not seem to have injured herself anywhere near as much as Honor and Odium did, and it's possible that this allows more control to be exercised over the raw power. It's also possible that the vessel herself could play a role in this for a few reasons. Cultivation's current vessel is Corvellium Avast and happens to be a dragon, and it seems reasonable that a dragon may have greater control over this sort of power than a human would, but without knowing a bit more about dragons, we can't really say definitively. It's also possible that Corvelium's goals align more closely with the intent of Cultivation, making it easier to control the power and how it's directed. Cultivation seems to be working on a very, very long timeline, which would, fit well with the Shard's intent, as well as the vessel's status as an immortal being, a dragon. But beyond peace, what reasons would Cultivation have for protecting Roshar? What other external threats may be lurking out in the Cosmere that would make it necessary to, presumably, have 3 brand new vessels at the helm of their Shards? What sort of dangers are out there? Everybody, I hope you'll give a warm welcome to Bookborn, who's going to go ahead and finish off our list by talking a little bit about Ghostbloods and Dawnshards.
Thanks, Lore. Now, we are going to be addressing a super important question right now, which is, what are the Ghostbloods' ultimate aims on Roshar, and how might they differ from Thadakar's ultimate aims? Now, to answer this question fully, we do have to go into significant Mistborn spoilers. So if you have not read Mistborn Era 1, Mistborn Era 2, and the novella Mistborn: A Secret History, I would skip this question and go on to question 10. Okay, you're gone? Good, let's get into it. So we all know Thadakar is Kelsier, one of my very favorite characters in the Cosmere, and incidentally, the first character me and Laura made a collaboration around. So if you want to know about Kelsier and his history, you could actually check out that first video. Thadakar is the leader of the Ghostbloods, which was an organization that was originally founded on Scadrial, but is now found everywhere in the Cosmere. We know Kelsier's current aims are to A, find a way off of Scadrial since he is currently trapped there as a cognitive shadow, and B, protect Scadrial's interests at all costs. Now, the main place as readers that we've mainly witnessed the Ghostbloods as an organization actually isn't on Scadrial, but rather on Roshar in the Stormlight Archive. That Ghostbloods organization, locally headed by Mraize, seemingly is supposed to have the same goals, but seems to have gone a little rogue. We know that one of their main goals is to find a way to get Stormlight off planet, and now presumably that might be in an effort to help Kelsier with his little cognitive shadow problem, but we also know that Mraize wants to trade an investiture and gain power that way, and one of the easiest investitures to get in the Cosmere is Stormlight. Through their communication with Shallan, we also know that they are interested in 2 of the Unmade, Ba-Ado-Mishram and Saja Anat. Now, we aren't exactly sure what they want with these 2 Unmade, but considering that they are very powerful and knowledgeable, and also that the Ghostbloods don't want Odium to win, they may be seeking them for those 2 purposes. I think it's also pretty safe to assume that the Ghostbloods on Roshar just want more power. Obviously, trading an investiture would lead to a lot of power, and being able to bond with the corrupted Spren of Saja Anat would also lead to more power. One of the main things we've noticed as a difference between these 2 primary Ghostblood organizations is how they are perceived. When we were first introduced to the Ghostbloods on Roshar, they seem violent, untrustworthy, and power hungry. In my opinion, this was greatly contrasted to how the Ghostbloods were introduced to us in Era 2 on Scadrial, where they seemed much more altruistic and also were full of characters we already know and trust. Now, the difference may simply be through storytelling. Perhaps both organizations are just as violent and power hungry as the other. However, it could also be an indication of a growing divide between the 2 sects of the Ghostbloods. Although Mraize, as introduced in the story, seems particularly violent and power-hungry, I do have to admit that those 2 adjectives could also describe our beloved Kelsier. If I had to predict anything, I would say in Winds and Truth, we will actually see a further chasm growing between the 2 sects of Ghostbloods. I personally think Mraize is very power-seeking, and I do not think he is as invested as protecting Scadrial as Kelsier is. Based on the fact that we are seeing an increasing number of world hoppers across all Cosmere novels, and also at the end of Rhythm of War, we were kind of teased that beings in the cognitive realm can be forced out into the physical realm. I would not be surprised at all if Kelsier's goal of getting off Scadrial is realized in Winds and Truth. That would likely mean we'd also get significant progress, if not completion, of getting Stormlight off-world. As this is the last Stormlight book in the first half of the series, and we know it is an ending, I expect significant Cosmere-wide implications to be happening in this book. Of course, if that happens, will Kelsier be able to reassert control over the Rosharian Ghostbloods, or will him and Mraize come head-to-head in a fight and bid for power? I guess we'll have to raffo on that one. And finally, we get to talk about Dawnshards. What are the Dawnshards actually capable of? Of all of our Cosmere mysteries going into Winds and Truth, I think this one may be the one I'm most interested in, and that's just because we have had a novella and a secret project heavily revolving around Dawnshards, and yet we still know so little about them. They are clearly extremely important in the Cosmere, and information's being kept for a reason. Of what we do know, and avoiding any secret project spoilers, is that there are 4 Dawnshards, and each is associated with a command with a capital C, and that Adonalsium used them to create the Cosmere. We know that Dawnshards were somehow involved in the destruction of Ashen, which was the original planet that the humans came from, who are currently on Roshar. And we also know that once you hold a Dawnshard, you are forever connected to it. Unfortunately, we don't know a ton generally about the Dawnshards other than that. The Dawnshard we know the most about is the one that Risen currently holds, the Dawnshard of Change. As Risen says in her novella Dawnshard,
"The will of a god to remake things, to demand they be better. The power to change."
Dawnshards come with side effects, and we don't actually know Risen's side effect yet, but the other Dawnshard we know a decent amount about is Hoid's, and we do happen to know his side effect, which is that when you hold the Dawnshard Hoid holds, you cannot harm yourself or others. However, we do not know the command that Hoid's Dawnshard is associated with. We also know, though, that Hoid held that Dawnshard so long that even though he may not be in possession of it right now, he still is under that condition that he cannot harm others or himself. There are some theories about what the other 3 Dawnshard commands might be, and they all revolve around either words that have been suspiciously capitalized in the novels or words that we just hear a lot. Common theories include that one might be survive, the word obviously associated with Kelsier, destroy, the word associated with Nightblood, and then unite, the word associated with Dalinar. However, if we think of the Dawnshards as the 4 words or 4 commands used to create the universe, does change, destroy, unite, and survive make sense as 4 words in that creation? Certainly change, destroy, and survive could be, although I feel like then we kind of get into the territory of repeating themes that were in Mistborn Era 1 with the shards on Scadrial, and I'm not sure that Brandon would want to kind of repeat those themes. I personally have a harder time fitting unite into those creation words, but ultimately, we're gonna have to just wait and see what the commands are. So how will the Dawnshards come into play in Wind of Truth? Well, at the end of Way of Kings, Honor implied that a Dawnshard might be needed to defeat Odium. As we know that the Dawnshards were involved in destroying Ashen, it could also mean that any involvement from the Dawnshards in this fight could end up destroying Roshar as well. I'm sure we'll see a lot of Risen in this installment, and since she promised never to become a Radiant while holding the Dawnshard, perhaps that will be enough to save Roshar from the same fate as Ashen. Since we know that Risen and at some point Hoid have held Dawnshards, and from a word of Brandon, we also know that we have seen another bear of a Dawnshard that is not Risen or Hoid.
GK Pseudo says, do we know anyone who is currently a Dawnshard other than Risen?
Yes, you have met people who are at least one who is currently a Dawnshard other than Risen.
That means it's possible that in Stormlight 5, we have 3 Dawnshards present in the story. If that's the case, is that a potential clue to how Odium will be ultimately defeated? We definitely know the Contest of Champions isn't going to go as planned, and since I'm convinced Dawnshards will be involved in some way in this installment, the only question remains, is it Odium that's going to be able to use the Dawnshards? Will Hoid come in and use a Dawnshard for his own purposes, or will someone be coming to the aid of Dalinar? Well, I think I'm gonna go start my reread, so I'll be extra prepared. But if any of you out there got a little lost in these questions and feel like you don't quite remember enough, but you also don't have time to reread 4 giant books before Wind and Truth comes out, Laura and I do have you covered. This Wednesday, over on my channel, we are releasing a recap of the first 4 books of the Stormlight Archive, so you can be prepared for the epic finale in Book 5.
Thank you very much, Bookborn. So that was that. 10 unanswered Stormlight questions. I want to hear what you think about any of these questions, or whatever. Just give me your thoughts, man. This has been Bookborn and Lore of the Worlds. Now I'm off to go research some Unmade. I'll see you soon.